Hello, Wild Rivers Coast. I am Dakotah Daily, host of the Daily Weekly. Thank you again for joining us. I'd like to thank the show's sponsor, Rick McNamer, for making it happen. I'd like to thank all of the wonderful volunteers at KCIW 100.7, and I would also like to start us off at the top of the hour by just acknowledging that we are on the traditional and unceded territories of the Chetco and Tututni Native American people, and we are very thankful for their ancestral and ongoing stewardship of culture and of ecosystems here in this place. And in particular, big shout out to the Northwest American Indian Coalition and Katrina and all the work that she does over there, and Tabitha Rood of the Wild Rivers Coast Forest Collaborative. Two amazing women that get a lot of cool land management stuff done in Curry County, making it a safer and better place for us to all live and enjoy. So instead of just making y'all listen to my junk drawer of eclectic music taste, like I do every week, I am actually sitting here in the studio with one of my best friends, Bryce, and we are going to talk to you today about things, and I'm very, very excited about it.
All manners of things. It's a pleasure to be here right now in the studio in the beautiful sunny Brookings. Managed to come through at the right time to visit my friend Dakotah here, who's putting down some good roots and get out there on the air.
So, Bryce, what have you prepared for us today to talk about?
You said you wouldn't put me on the spot like this.
I told Bryce that we could talk about any number of things today, and I have no doubt that we're going to find some interesting ones. So Bryce and I went together to university in British Columbia, which was a really cool experience. We both studied a handful of eclectic things, one of which ended up getting me on my career path now. I was working with Bryce when we approached the Indigenous community where we were spending some time and studying, and they said, you know, we really need somebody to help us with this project. We're teaching drones how to count salmon in streams, because for 50 years we've had data where we have Uncle John who's standing in a creek on Sunday afternoons with a clipboard, and we have, you know, decades of data of Uncle John saying, well, this Sunday afternoon I saw 8 salmon on this stream, and next Sunday afternoon I saw 4. And that's kind of the baseline ecological data that was being used to protest and make attempts at better regulation on the salmon farms, which, if anybody is interested in or knows something about salmon farms that farm Atlantic salmon on the West Coast, like are found all over Vancouver Island, BC, and parts of the United States as well, they're farming the wrong species. And in order to do that, to meet the demand for salmon that we have in our diet, they have to use tremendous amounts of pesticides and fertilizers in open net pens, which is leading to the extinction of wild salmon populations. And somebody from the tribe said, we want to teach drones how to count salmon so we have better data, so we know where the salmon are at risk. Can you do this, Bryce and Dakotah? And we said, no, we are studying sociology. But then we actually went back to our professors, and Bryce and I looked at what would be required to figure this out, and we split it up. And you took discrete mathematics,
I took
machine learning.
linear algebra, which is all the math that kind of goes on behind a neural network for machine learning. Because the thing is, we've this drone, the salmon kind of technology, you've got the technology of the drone first off. But then you also have to do something with all the footage. So you use this very early AI at the time, which was really kind of in these academic circles, even just like 6-7 years ago, which is crazy to see how far it's come today. But train the AI model by us. We train the training data by circling salmon on these aerial photos.
Spending dozens of hours identifying images, clicking on things. And we started with shorebirds, where we were doing thousands of images of shorebirds, and you're like, there's 3 different species, and if one is like slightly more gray and slightly bigger, then you give it a yellow dot.
You know those I'm Not a Robot captures that you do before when you log in? I think we've done enough for a lifetime in counting salmon. If you ever see a fish, we've identified that training data.
It's wild thinking back about that now, because that was 2018, and like you were saying at the time, these image recognition models were in their very early stages. I remember at the time that we started doing automated image recognition, machine learning is what it was called, neural networks was all the literature. Those were the buzzwords. The only people that I knew of that were using that of scale was Chinese surveillance systems. Like I remember at the time, we were essentially repurposing technology that was used to identify people in like subways and in street crossings as just part of like a Chinese citizen information database.
Social credit score, which is all in place now too.
That is a Black Mirror episode in of itself.
Truly.
But they had taught when you got onto the subway in China, this was in 2018, boom, your name is Bryce Andreasen, this is your social credit score. And we, at that time, before AI had taken off, were using that to count salmon.
Because... Yeah, you talking to little nerdy Dutch researchers who were all birders. And that was like the cutting edge on like the non-military defense side was these little nerdy researchers trying to count their seabirds better.
Yeah. Pretty cool use of the technology. And that was the first time that I had ever really made a map on a computer. Mm-hmm. And I have been hooked. Now I'm a full-time cartographer, and fortunately, I found some people who need a lot of maps. So yesterday, I printed out 50 maps that I had made, and I'm really grateful to be here in Curry County where, there is a lot of active land stewardship, at least planning that's going on. There are a lot of cool projects, and we are at an interesting spot here in this community mostly because of Katrina and Tabitha and their organizations that I mentioned. Like there are a lot of resources that are coming in now to do pretty extensive community wildfire prevention planning. And when you start to get millions of dollars and thousands of people together to light things on fire and cut trees down, you're making a lot of maps. So
yeah, a lot of decisions to be made there that need a lot of information to back them up.
Yeah. So that's one interest. I listed that as just one thing that's on the poo-poo platter of options that we have. That's how Bryce and I know each other. We have spent some time outdoors together. We have both been guides on the Salmon River together. Since that time, Bryce has led a very interesting and active career in guiding, which I know is your entire world. So maybe you don't want to get on here and just talk about your job because you work a lot doing bikepacking trips for back roads. And you're also a very passionate sailor.
Yes, you and I have shared some time out on the water before.
We have some really interesting and eclectic taste in music. We're both a bit of philosophy and sociology nerds, and we could probably talk 5 or 10 or 20 episodes about like old French and German and some contemporary sociologists. We could talk about Foucault all day or Zizek. But I mean, I think we got plenty of material to riff on. So it was just a joke when I asked you what your agenda was for the meeting.
We sure do have an eclectic range of topics that we've gone about over the years.
So what is Afrofuturism?
It all begins with a radical reimagining. It always does.
Yeah.
But you're going to space where all of the previous structures and systems of control no longer exist. And I think the big thing is that so much of culture is rooted in what came before. And a lot of people would argue probably is always a product of it. But Afrofuturism really just drops the mic and goes interstellar there.
Who's Sun Ra, and why is he significant to the Afrofuturist movement?
All right, Tobias Van Veen. Sun Ra. Sun Ra is the OG of them all, touting the Egyptian headdress and a saxophone. He plays some riffs and makes some movies and tries to imagine what is usually unimaginable.
One of my favorite lines from his movie, Sun Ra being like the canon of Afrofuturist literature, of reimagining a future of like space-bound humanity that does have African-American people in it. Because so often in the cultural imagination, like space is for the elite. which is actually a really interesting conversation given everything
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
happened this week.
Katy Perry just went to space
Katy
this
Perry
week.
just went to space, so this is a ripe time to be talking about Afrofuturism. But Sun Ra has this movie called Space is the Place, which looks like if you had asked ChatGPT to turn a tarot deck into a storyboard for a movie and then animate it with like epic live action. Gosh, it was probably made in the 70s, that flick. Really, really cool movie. But yeah, in that movie, he like shows up at the local community center where everybody's like singing music and playing pool in the neighborhood that's like an entirely black community. And he says, y'all, they're going to space without you. The main culture is going to space and they're not taking any black astronauts. So I'm here to take black people to space on my spaceship powered by jazz. And then they have insane guitar and electric solos and all of these brass and drums come out. And he leads an orchestra, which is what he calls his arc, which is powered by jazz, through space and creates a home on, I think it's Saturn.
It's Saturn.
For African-American people. Really cool stuff that was going on. I mean, this guy, he renounced his identity as a U.S. citizen and said, I pretty much have no rights as a black man in the 70s in the United States. So that's not my name. That's not my social security number. That's not my birth certificate. I am Sun Ra, and I am imagining a future for black people.
You got to leave it. You got to leave it all behind if you want to take the next step. That's what Sun Ra is all about. He embodied that personally, dropping his name.
Yeah, cool stuff. So, what do you think about Katy Perry going to space?
I think it falls quite short compared to Sun Ra. It's always good to raise awareness, right? And like any sort of cause you do, especially some of the ones that feel pretty altruistic. Say making like nature documentaries and perhaps impinging on an ecosystem or flying a camera crew across into the middle of the Amazon. But at a certain point, you need awareness does require a cost. And if that's sending Katy Perry up to space for no good reason than the fact that we're talking about it right now, then maybe that's worth it, especially for empowering women too. Let's bring another minority into space.
Okay, that's what I was
Sorry, women are not a minority.
Yeah, statistically. Just in terms of representation.
Yes.
So is that the awareness that we got from this? Was that like women can be astronauts, women can go to space? I mean, they weren't even astronauts. Women can participate along the ride by sitting there. Is that the awareness we got from it?
It's really just you can go to space if you're rich and famous.
Yeah.
Which we already kind of knew.
So I had an experience during my undergrad when I hadn't declared a major yet. And I was like, what do I want to study? And when you're in the environmental sciences, folks, let me tell you, it's kind of a gloomy field to be in as somebody. So my job on wildfire teams used to be the data analysis. I was the computer nerd, the graph nerd for type 1 wildfire suppression, which is the highest level of wildfire suppression that you can buy as a country, as a team. That's the highest level of team that we can send out to a wildfire. And it was tough because my job was to read the data and make the graphs and understand how hot and fast and dangerous wildfire is. And it's hard when you're looking at the numbers and just every week you are breaking the scientific record for fire danger and severity. Because in like 2020, 2021, we were just literally breaking the world record for the hottest and worst fires we had ever seen regularly, like one after another. So it's tough being in those disciplines and just being faced with like so much negative information.
Yeah.
I would say, and I remember when I hadn't declared my undergrad, I was talking to my friends. I was like, I don't know what I want to study. I don't know what I want to do. I'm in my first or second year of college. I've got lots of options. Should we be thinking about like space and like terraforming and like maybe our Earth is in such a bad place that it is really worth like investing in and getting a degree in studying space? And I was just talking to one of my friends while we were having coffee about this. It was our friend Mason. And Mason said, dude, Earth is rad and space sucks. And that changed my life, honestly. I know it sounds really silly, but Earth is rad and space sucks. That's generally how I feel about it. And I think it's interesting that some of the people that are most responsible for doing some of the most ecological damage possible, and I'm talking about Jeff Bezos, is kind of the poster boy for these rich people being able to go up into space and go have a margarita. Like, that to me is a kind of techno-feudalist empire that is like the harbinger of the apocalypse in terms of late stage capitalism.
Yeah, I agree with you for the most part. I think space is a really interesting myth. Like, it's the new frontier in a lot of ways, but I think it is a myth. Like, you have got all of our billionaires playing in space. You know, Musk, I think, gets a lot of credit for saying he's going to terraform Mars and take humans there. And that's viewed as like a really, like grand civilizational goal that might merit any sort of damage he's doing in the meantime. But it all is just kind of a hoax.
Wait, will you say more by that? Because it's kind of confusing to me, like space is a myth. I'm like, it's out there.
It's out there. So few people have ever been. It's
Right.
it's such a hard place to populate and settle compared to Earth and
So
every
you mean it's
metric.
a myth in terms of like it's out of our reach, or in terms of like we have all of these ideas that are like bigger than what we're going to find out there?
I think it's almost entirely out of our reach,
Oh, interesting.
given how slowly our technology is going and the scale and the bleakness we've seen out there. Like, we've been able to look so far, and yet we found nothing that seems promising
Interesting.
in a lot of regards, except maybe for space mining. But even then, it's too far for us to do anything about it.
Yeah.
And so it just like exists as just an idea or this myth to justify I think to justify really anything that could make a case for it.
Like
Whether that's like
trashing
winning the space race, or like, there wasn't that much strategic benefit to get into space first, but it was like this challenge or an achievement or this myth.
Interesting. Yeah, the space race was about political identity. It wasn't necessarily about the technological advantage.
And that's when space
that
caught
every
our
country wanted to be first.
and so that's when it caught our imagination too.
That's interesting.
Right? Like so much probably propaganda.
Yeah. There's a really great documentary that I watched recently about the satellite and rocket economy that's kind of happening right now, because there's really only a couple players in it. Like, you have NASA, who's the slow burn. They've been obviously doing the thing for a long time. You have a company in New Zealand which builds like Ferraris. They spend 6 months making these rockets that are perfectly engineered, and they perform without fail. You have Planet Labs, which is the one that a lot of people don't know about, which is a company that you and I have been interested in for a long time.
Yeah,
because
partners even.
Yeah, they actually are partners and sponsors of my company, Teton Topo, which is helping to reduce wildfire risk in Curry County by advanced GIS analytics. And what they have is hundreds, probably pushing at this point, thousands of satellites that are the sizes of shoe boxes. And they, similar to Skylink, but for longer, have been orbiting the Earth in a synchronization that allows them to do high resolution capturing of the Earth every single day in multispectral imaging, which might just sound like a bunch of mumbo jumbo. But as somebody who makes maps, it's really interesting to me, because we can look at all of these types of invisible light and pictures of the Earth every single day. And I can look at these maps and I can change the settings, and using invisible light, I can say, this area is drier than usual. Even if it looks like essentially the same color to the eye, we can look at things like specifically the kinds of invisible light that like chlorophyll emits or methane emissions emit. And you can make a map that only shows like a bright light where there's methane being emitted. And they've actually detected like massive either infrastructure projects that have leaks or illegal kinds of commercial activity that are releasing methane, which is an invisible to the eye gas. So it's really interesting. And then there's this company that was kind of like a Silicon Valley tech boy who was trying to make rockets like cheap and fast. He said that they were like the Ford, where New Zealand had like the Ferraris and the Porsches. They were trying to make cheap, fast rockets so that, people could be launching stuff into space all the time. But if you look at a map of how many satellites are in geostationary and orbital orbit right now, there's a real concern that like there's so many satellites, so many tens of thousands of satellites right now. And if one of them hits, like in that scene in Interstellar, another one, they explode into like thousands of little screws.
The speed differential between them is thousands, sometimes even tens of thousands of miles per hour. So the smallest pieces can cause the biggest impact. Like something the size of like a Cheez-It could put a hole through the ISS.
It's insane. And there's this cool and terrifying visualization of like the point in which you reach where there's so many satellites covering the Earth that you imagine two hit each other, they explode into thousands of pieces of shrapnel. Each of those have different unique orbits that are changing and interacting with the geostationary and the moving orbits.
And they're all trying to avoid as well, and they're avoiding the other people who are avoiding.
And it's not hard to imagine a point where it just snowballs, where you literally just have fireworks in the sky, and then what you have around Earth is like an impenetrable shield of space junk.
It is, yeah. It's just wild. I think it's a lot of a tragedy of the commons up there too, because it's inordinately expensive to do anything about it. No one's going to be a good Samaritan.
No,
but
and it would be
so
technically
much
impossible,
trash.
right, to go clean up space from.
Not impossible. There's actually a bunch of companies who are working on it
Like
because we will
thousands of
reach
little
a problem. Yeah.
How do you do that if they're traveling at 10,000 miles an hour?
One of the ideas uses this big sail, but again, it's not going to happen for a long time. But
giant magnets. The other day we had a show in here as part of the KCIW Sunday Show Curry Cafe. We were talking about clean energy. And I said that I think that because radioactive materials, which are resulting from nuclear energy, are essentially like the one consistent downside, the inconsistent downside being nuclear explosion. But the consistent downside of nuclear power production is radioactive waste. And somebody said, well, what should we do about this? And I think we should just blast it into space.
What if it hits the atmosphere and the rocket blows up?
Just pick a direction.
Then we've just radiated the planet.
But we only send it in Porsches. We don't send it in Fords. And we make sure that it's strong enough to make it through the trash field in low Earth orbit.
I was just looked up this number while you were chatting earlier. There's 7,000 Starlink satellites right now, which is what Elon's company to provide satellite internet, which is a really interesting concept actually for connecting the world. Kind of an interesting discussion too, where it starts to become affordable and for everyone, almost like the second after we've electrified places, as I mean, for world development. Next thing we might do is bring them internet, if that's going to be some sort of basic right. But essentially, Musk at the moment is just spamming space and trying to get more satellites than his competitors, and he is by several times. They're shooting for 42,000 to create the full
42?
link, and they're at 7,000 right now. And then from personal experience, I spent a lot of time down in the central coast of California, and there's a Space Force base down there where we've been before. We've tried to infiltrate that base, Dakotah.
Bryce and I actually made it all the way past the first gate to Space Force one time because Space Force was inconveniently built on Surf Beach.
And this is the Vandenberg Space Force Base.
Yeah, which hasn't been around for that long.
You might remember this Vandenberg Air Force Base has been around for a long, long time, recently repatriated.
And you previously were able to access Surf Beach, which is why I'm imagining they call it that. And Bryce and I, one time, were trying to go surfing at Surf Beach, and we pulled up to this gate, and I said, hey, I think we might have taken a wrong turn.
And meanwhile, we're zigzagging through all of these barricades and pylons in the middle of the road. So I'm having to slow down.
iPhone, I'm looking at Surf Beach. We've got a van with surfboards strapped to the top. And then all of a sudden, we drive through these barbed wire gates on either side to this concrete barrier. And this guy in a military outfit comes and asks us,
very authoritatively, where do you think you're going? To which Dakotah answers,
I was a kid who was in trouble. I was like, we're trying to go to Surf Beach. And he said, there's no surf at Surf Beach. And I looked at him and I said, well, bud, it seems like kind of a misnomer, right? And he said, give me your IDs. And then I said, we're just going to turn around. And he said, no, you're not. Stay here. And he left with our driver's licenses.
And then when he did return on the way back out again, he goes, after a few minutes, oh, misnomer. I get it now.
Yeah, you can't really surf at Surf Beach. So
regardless, every single day, more or less, there's an average of like 27 launches a month. From Vandenberg at the Space Force Base, which is where X is launching most of its rockets at the moment.
Sounds like we need to make another trip down there.
And it's pretty much every single day they're launching another one up, another payload. It's not always the Starlinks, but they are a private contractor for NASA, taking all of the American space weight up there, all the cargo. And that's why they're using the Vandenberg Air Force Base.
So
Space Force Base.
Interesting to think about. We talk about privatization on this show a lot.
Yes.
We're about to talk about it in space. This documentary about the space race, the current space race, is really interesting because you have Planet, the conservation company. They're essentially like the hippies of this. And they also are definitely like a lot of California techie people, but they're doing it for like ecological and social benefit. And then you have Elon Musk, who's doing all of this just like full on privatization, globalization, new world agenda. And he, for example, like the kinds of differences between the things that are happening between these different groups, during the initial conflicts between Russia and Ukraine, Elon Musk selectively disabled communication networks on the Ukrainian side, giving a distinct disadvantage to Ukraine during initial conflicts with Russia. Planet Labs, on the other hand, publicly revealed imagery and granted access to photos that were showing and highlighting Russian movements that would have been otherwise, without like a surveillance plane, completely inaccessible, and got a jump start on some of the initial reporting that was happening with the Russian invasion. So all of a sudden you have these two companies that are both supposedly doing a lot of things for science, like Tesla is contracting satellites for NASA, which has been responsible for the vast majority of the environmental geospatial data that we've had since the 60s. They've been taking photos of the Earth that are still being used as critical baselines, is now being contracted out to a company that is blatantly taking sides in major global conflicts, while we have another company, which is more environmentally and socially conscious, taking the other side. So we just have two private companies in space turning their satellites on and off. They could be doing this from an iPhone in Hawaii, making these decisions that are influencing global political conflicts.
Yeah, this just really, there's no accountability to the people in the same way. Although I will say, though, I mean, that these American-owned satellites have been used strategically in global conflicts for their very existence. And just because now we have a private company doing it doesn't mean it's actually that big of a departure. We still have satellites that are politically motivated in what they do and don't do.
Yeah.
And that'll always be the thing, too. It's a pretty wild concept, going back to Planet Labs, that we can observe Earth at such small resolution and in so many different ways from space. Like, in a lot of ways, the true privacy is gone.
Totally. I think that people actually, if they saw the things that I work with every day about how highly detailed photos of the entire Earth are being taken so regularly, that it would be a massive concern for regular, everyday people, global privacy, because you are literally the entire Earth from the sky is being photographed in high resolution every day. Looking at invisible light in addition to the light we see. We have space LiDAR. They're shooting lasers at the Earth from space every day that can detect whether you're sticking your right arm out or your left arm out and how high that arm is above the ground. I mean, it's truly wild. I really like what you said about like the fact that just because this is moving into a space of privatization, like corporatization as a way, sure, it's a slight departure from like the kind of nationalism that was fueling these same dynamics before. Is it really that big of a departure, or is this more of like kind of a logistical difference for the same kind of thing that's happening?
Yeah, what do you think?
That's something that I think is really interesting, and it's something I think about a lot, because in particular now, to like zoom out a little bit, just about the amount of like humanitarian conflicts and like human rights violations that we're seeing perpetrated by the federal government
Yeah.
on a weekly basis at this point. And for anybody who's interested, my company hosts a data set of all of the human rights violations and environmental catastrophes that are being perpetuated by this current federal administration. We host all of this data at radgeo.ca. That's www.radgeo.ca. We've got student visas pulled. We have missing people. We have people being deported or detained. We have cuts to medical research. We have Doge firings, and we have all of this data spatially explicit, mapped out, where you can click on individual points in individual states and learn about the thousands and thousands of just total BS political moves that are being pulled and like really undermining human and natural communities right now. So we host all of this data, and something that comes up a lot, and I'm hearing a lot right now, is like, I cannot believe this is the kind of thing that our American government is participating in. And that's the point that reminds me of what you just said. That's really interesting, because when I hear somebody say, and I'm saying it too, I'm catching myself doing this also, I cannot believe that as America, we are torturing people and pulling them off of the streets and deporting them and sending them to, and tearing up these families. And then I have to really stop myself and look back at our reputation and the things that our country has been involved in and the things that our politicians have been doing forever, for easily. I mean, I was born in the late 90s, but if I look back at the 90s and the 80s and the 70s and the kinds of international things that we have been meddling in and the things we have been doing to both citizens and not citizens, what we're actually seeing is a ratcheting up. We're seeing more groups being targeted, and the amount of people that it's okay to essentially treat like non-humans.
All in the name of the country and the country's progress.
We're just expanding our definition of who it is that we're allowed to kill and torture and kidnap. But really, that there's always a line. There's always been a line in global politics and in national politics of who is it okay to treat like they're not human and who is the human group. And really what we're seeing right now is that like, oh, there's an expansion to treat queer people like they have less human rights. There's an expansion to more explicitly treat people of color and Hispanic people as if they don't have human rights. Whereas really in a lot of ways that was happening under our previous administration, but it's being cranked up right now. We're seeing women lose tons of access to reproductive rights. We are seeing a pretty, like, within my lifetime, unprecedented war against low-income people. And we're also experiencing, like, the greatest income disparity that's ever been seen. And the war against poor people, that is what's happening in the United States right now, is the war against poor people at a time where there have never been more poor people. There's a lot of things about it that are scary, but I think it is also relevant to ground it in the context of, other than moments and chapters here and there, like really this is the pattern that we've been seeing out. And there's something interesting about this like shock and awe surprise of like, I can't believe we're sending people to Guantanamo. It's like, well, we already had a Guantanamo.
It existed already.
Yeah, we're opening up something that this isn't a reinvention of the wheel, right? It's just a little bit more extreme than we were seeing a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is almost cyclical, this process of othering as like a means to scapegoat or to get something done. And I think we're just hitting a time of fear in the world that it kind of, that's ratcheting back up again.
Yeah. So one time at Burning Man, there was a tent, like a massive what are they called? Like a center pole tent where it's just like one like 30-foot stick in the middle and then it comes down. So it's like a big cone, but it's big enough to hold, 100 people in it. Excuse me. There was a whiteboard outside and it said, at 4 o'clock today, we're having a lecture on the meaning of life. And I have personally, that's been an interesting topic for me for a while. It's something I've been curious about.
So you decided to drop in for class?
I was like, oh, that's in 20 minutes. Yeah, I'm going to drop in for class. And the guy talked about something who I actually think about this all the time. He laid out this idea that like with the Big Bang, all matter, right, was in a point this big, just the tip of a pen. All energy and all matter in the universe at one point, moments before the Big Bang, was singular. And then what we've been experiencing from the instant the Big Bang began, say that 10 times real fast.
The Big Bang began. What happened then?
We've been seeing expansion. And what we're seeing is differentiation and separating and fractions, and like things are getting more and more and more and more separate and disconnected. And what we're seeing now in our global and societal conflicts is increasing disconnection. So think about this. Everything was the same. Then we had a couple different base elements. Then you have carbon and hydrogen and oxygen coming together. Then we're experiencing new kinds of compounds as we start to have masses that are coming together and creating fission and fusion, and we're having suns that are spitting out new chemicals. Then we have these clouds that are just creating more and more and more diversity. And what we're experiencing now, if we're looking at like our global politics or our national politics, is like more and more othering as an extension of even creating this like common brotherhood of humanity that we have, is even splitting up more and more and more and more, and things are just getting further and further apart. And instead of me and you and the table and the frog and the ocean realizing that we are all the same fabric of matter that is existing at different vibrations in different assemblages, but essentially one and the same, all made of stardust, we're moving towards this increasing separation. And that all, just like an inhale from the Big Bang to complete separation, is going one way, and then eventually the universe will inhale and it'll go the other way, and we'll all go back to singularity. And we're just in pulses, and that's just where we are on this wave.
This sounds like some universal astrology, Dakotah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Entering the
the same way you can say
astrological
that
realm.
about Buddhism in general sounds like universal astrology. And the Buddha has lots of metaphors like that. He's like, how many Buddhists? The Buddha we know was the sixth Buddha.
Yeah.
But when asked, how many Buddhists have come before you, the answer is infinite. How often do the Buddhists come? But the sixth Buddha, like in our recorded history that we know, is the most recent one. And he said, well, if you
I didn't know that, actually. I thought the Buddha as we know him was the first.
No, he was the sixth.
Right, I've
within
never
their lineage.
thought about going back in the past.
Yeah, he was like, I'm the sixth one that like y'all remember and have reincarnated. And he said that if you imagine you have a stone that is 1 mile by 1 mile by 1 mile, a giant cube made of stone, and that every 100 years a monk came out and he wiped just an inch of the stone with a piece of cloth. And then for 100 years, he didn't touch it, but he came out and he wiped that piece of cloth again. And the amount of time that it would take for him to erode away that entire stone, still a Buddha would not have been reincarnated. Like that is the kind of timeline that they are operating on. So yeah, I think like in that sense, those kinds of macro commentaries and ideas about like energy fluctuation, it is kind of like Buddhism is kind of universal astrology in some ways.
When you place, actually, I guess every religion kind of places itself amongst the stars, literally in constellations, or how their world was created. Because that's how you kind of.
Does Christianity do that? You mean with like this, and then there was light?
Well, we're talking about how the universe was created 3,000 years ago, and there's finality to it. Like it tells you where it fits in that.
Yeah, the meaning of like.
So if Buddhism's going to tell you the universe has been around for forever, so is Buddhism.
Yeah.
Christianity's been around for just as long as the world's been around. They have to match. Otherwise, it's like, well, then where did this thing come from? It hasn't. If it was true, why hasn't it always been true?
Yeah,
or
religion
found?
has to, it has to have been there the whole time. So that question of how long has this been here is really important.
That's a good quote. Religion has to have been here the whole time.
Yeah, otherwise, because if you're like, well, this religion just started. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but they are then built.
And then the prophets are just the firmware updates.
Because Mormonism was like roughly built on top of other religious frameworks, right? Was it built off of
the Latter-day Saints.
Were they built off of like a Christian tangent?
Yeah, they were.
We're still about Jesus, but now we also have golden plates.
Yes, golden plates?
Yeah, the origin story of Mormonism has to do with,
I don't know about this one.
I believe it's Joseph Smith finding
Joseph Smith.
New instructions.
I didn't know that, but I do know I spent some time in Salt Lake
experts.
City. There's this pass to get over into Salt Lake, and you've got to cross the Wasatch, and it's an insanely challenging, beautiful alpine pass, 8,000 feet up in the mountains of Utah. And you come over the other side, and it's called This Is the Place, because Joseph Smith stood there after crossing the mountains and then the plains, looking over Salt Lake, and this massive lake in this basin in between these mountains, and declaring, this is the place. Like, this is where we're stopping.
Yeah.
And then a good couple days later, when they made it down to the lake, it was found to be too salty to drink. But still, Joseph Smith and his whole crew behind him held the faith and stuck through. Could you imagine being salty, no pun intended, after you find the place your God has told you to, and the water's not drinkable?
Yeah,
big,
that's tough.
beautiful lake, you can't drink it.
They had that follow through though, and you do have to really respect that.
It's a lesson.
Okay, Bryce, I have two questions for you,
Okay.
and I'd like you to choose one. You don't have to answer them both.
All right.
My first question is, what is interesting in the world of sailing today in 2025? And my second question is, what are the most interesting and obscure philosophical topics that you've been pondering lately?
I'm gonna run with the first one to start, and then in so doing, answer the second.
Okay, perfect.
No, just the first one. In the world of sailing, there's this amazing woman, Cole Brower, who is just set the fastest solo female nonstop circumnavigation, and in so doing, sailed really well, really fast, and was also made a lot of like really fun, interesting content of the raw life on the boat, like days with your headphones on and you're dancing off the bow, and engaged a lot of new people in the sport of sailing and empowered a lot of women too. So that's been something really cool. And immediately she went in. The America's Cup is the biggest competition in sailing every couple years, and she was one of the 3 commentators, bringing in like a new voice to offshore sailing and women in sailing, and just badass feats overall, and how fun and how gnarly it can be. The real type 1 and type 2 fun.
Cool. Very cool. What about boats? Because recently I've been seeing, mostly because you send me videos of them, boats that are barely even touching the water and are going so fast.
Hydrofoils.
What is up with that?
What is up with hydrofoils? Everything's up with hydrofoils, because what they do is they lift your boat out of the water. Long story short, they create lift under the surface, and that allows that lift, that upward force, to go up from the foil, which is like a horizontal wing, up through the mast, which is that vertical piece, and then onto the hull of the boat, and makes it fly above the water instead of just skimming along the top, exactly like how you picture a normal boat. The hydrofoil underneath uses all the same principles as an airplane wing. It would look just like one, more or less. And so by traveling through the water being much denser than air, you're able to generate a lot of lift at a much lower speed than you would at an airplane. And it comes off the very back edge of that wing under the water, just like it would an airplane wing, and provides that lift.
I see so many people on a boat going so fast.
Mm-hmm.
And the only time I've ever privately captained, I flipped the Hobie Cat that I was on. I capsized. So it makes me wonder. I see these people going so fast. It makes me wonder if this is not just like the recipe for like the gnarliest wipeouts in any sport
Oh, like
I
you
could ever
wouldn't
imagine.
believe. You wouldn't believe.
And I mean, these are probably what, $500,000 carbon fiber things that are like each size is like, each hull is like the size of a bus, and they're on a catamaran with like 12 people going 100 miles an hour.
Yes, I mean right now what you are describing is the America's Cup. It is the longest standing sports trophy in the world. It goes on every like 4, 6-ish years or so. It just happened to Barcelona this year. Team Britain and New Zealand made it to the finals. But they are on
There's our
70,
American team.
70.
We're not in the final of the American Cup.
No. We don't have a deep-rooted.
Talking about reclaiming American greatness, let's give them the Gulf of Mexico back and take the American Cup. Come on.
These boats are 72-foot catamarans. Catamarans have 2 hulls. They're on foils. The rudder, there's one foil off the rudder in the back and one about halfway up. And these boats, no joke, are doing 60, 70 knots, and which is, you got to increase that by about 30% to turn into miles per hour. So they're ripping around the course at highway speeds, making these tight maneuvers.
That's crazy.
And imagine car racing, sure, they go faster than 65, right? But they're always going in the same direction on pretty much the same course.
You're turning left.
Now imagine you're doing this on a sailboat with 0 brakes, and you're actually going at each other and dipping and dodging and going under and around and making these calls, because the America's Cup is actually a 1v1 race called a match race. So you are literally battling it out 1 for 1, and the closing speed on these boats is 120 miles an hour with no brakes.
So when you're watching the American Cup, are there only 2 boats sailing at a time?
Yeah, it's like a tournament
Got it.
kind of structure.
And then people, dodgeball style, move forward in like a big bracket.
There's you've got a start and a pre-start, and they let you into the box pre-start, which is like the ring, this area underneath the starting line below the course. And they let you in a minute and a half early. You come from either end. You do a coin toss to figure out which boat's going to come in first to have a different advantage. And then essentially you've got these series of different chess plays you can make about, okay, if they go up, we go up. Okay, then if they do this, then we do that. As sort of like if-thens. And then you've got some time to kind of outmaneuver the other person in the box, and then the start countdown begins. And then you run the start. And then the race itself begins. But really, it's amazing to see the boats of today are unrecognizable from 30 years ago or so, and they're applying hydrofoils everywhere now.
Could you tell our audience a little bit about your humble, legendary status as a laser captain and some of the recent titles that you've taken?
Yeah, laser captain is a fun title to go along with that. I sometimes forget about the other meaning of that word. Laser is the men's single-handed Olympic boat. I think it's got the most models ever produced of a one design. So it means they're all the same. You can race against each other with no handicap. And come from my dad was a diehard laser sailor, Olympic coach, and kind of followed that in his footsteps. Had no choice, just like a lot of kids follow in their parents' footsteps with the sport, and been coaching and sailing professionally for a number of years now as I make this seasonal lifestyle work. And great joy of mine is going out to some unexplored places and doing so.
How'd you like being a raft guide?
It really was just another step to being a waterbender. You got to figure out all the different elements in different ways. It did teach me a lot. It was a hell of a good time. It really was. It's like if you took sailing and then you just got rid of all the rules.
That's what rafting is?
Yes.
That explains why I am the way I am.
You're always going down. You're not even making your own speed. You're just kind of doing a little maneuvering.
Yeah, rafting really, if you take the amount of control and precision that you have in sailing, you really do throw it all away in rafting. And you're like, I'm just going to try to get us down a way that's splashy but not going to kill us. I'm going to push the boat really hard this way. But all I can do is push it, and I'm just a little guy.
Don't worry, the boat is actually made of almost unpoppable rubber. So you can hit all the you want. And guess what? You never even have to work to keep moving because you're always going to be moving.
That probably explains why I don't have a very precise navigation in my life. It's kind of blunt force oftentimes.
Hey, some of the best metaphors come from the river.
That's true.
And the best lessons, too.
That's true. Something you've told me before is that the most powerful metaphors for how to describe what life is, life is like when you're not using a box of chocolates. It tends to be metaphors about the garden and metaphors about the river.
Yeah, I think it was Octavia Butler who said that.
Is that right?
Circling back to Afrofuturism, another crazy sci-fi writer.
Cool. What Octavia Butler have you read?
She's in a Kanye song.
What?
Mm-hmm.
Like her voice, or
he drops her in a lyric.
Like he shouts her out. Mm-hmm. She didn't drop a bar.
I wish.
Is Octavia Butler alive? Will you do a little fact check?
I don't know. Fact check guy.
Octavia Butler.
That's me.
We're gonna have Steve, our fact check guy, pull this up for us. Octavia Butler is a American sci-fi author. She's an African American woman, and she is a legend in the genre of sci-fi. And she died in what year is that, Steve?
2006.
In 2006, she died, but she wrote some super influential books. One of the most famous, I believe, is Parable of the Sower, which takes place in the not-so-distant post-apocalyptic California environment, where they're rebuilding this society after devastating wildfires have kind of led to martial law and then years of hard times. And the Parable of the Sower is about this young gal who realizes that the only consistent thing in life is change. And she creates a religion and kind of starts the new human society based off of honoring this idea of change. Another thing that Octavia Butler wrote is the Xenogenesis trilogy. And xeno, if you think about like xenophobia is the fear of the other, xeno being the root for, I'm guessing, a Greek word or maybe a Latin word for other, phobia being fear. That gives you xenophobia, the fear of others. But the Xenogenesis trilogy is about the creation of the other. Mm-hmm. And the Xenogenesis trilogy follows humans who have been captured by an alien species, which is going around and taking the best traits from every species that they capture and using it to fold into their own genomic database and create hybrid human aliens. And it follows the stories of some humans who essentially wake up one day captive to flying, telekinetic, telepathic space octopuses. And they essentially have to be integrated into this alien society. And coming from a Black radical feminist woman, it says a lot about our ideas of otherness and belonging. And it's a sci-fi I would highly recommend.
Yeah, science fiction always does a good job of putting that mirror up to you, like kind of a funhouse mirror where things are distorted. And what do you call other? What don't you call other?
What is your, do you have any favorite novels or movies or ideas that have come from sci-fi?
Oh,
or like a favorite sci-fi author or book?
It's a great question.
Anything to give to the reading list for our interested audience?
Honestly, I think I've got to say good old Dune. If you missed reading it in the last wave of Dune popularity, this is the second wave of me telling you should read it right now. A phenomenal piece of world building, which really is a highlight of science fiction in general, and I think a reason why a lot of people love it. Sometimes the plots aren't too different than maybe, say, fantasy. I believe science fiction is a subgenre of fantasy, if you really think about it. Yeah. Let's take a look at Star Wars. This is a little bit of a low-hanging fruit, but also the biggest fruit on the branch, too. Star Wars, you've got like a prince and a kingdom and a damsel in distress, and he's got to go to Jabba the Hutt, on like a pervy old king in his big castle and his empire, and he's stealing the damsel in distress. And you're gotta go in, and a knight literally a Jedi knight, fights in these rings with his sword, with his honor, and his cast of men around him. That's a medieval fantasy plot.
Totally.
If you just take out a couple of the techie words.
So my question to you, to give some advice to our audience, is how many books should the people who are getting into Dune, how many books into the Dune series should they read? This is a controversial question, but I just want to know your
Yeah. I'm going on the low side, to be honest. I'm going to say just a good book and a half.
Yeah.
But then you must substitute in at least like 2 or 3 of these 20-minute episodes on YouTube that go deep into the Dune lore.
Oh, cool.
You're gonna learn all about the Butlerian Jihad and the God Emperor.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to read a couple thousand pages of in between to get all that good world building.
See, I wish somebody would have told me that, because I didn't watch the YouTube videos. I read 7 books and 5.5 of them were trash. Rest in peace, Frank Herbert. You made a massive contribution to the scientific literature, and I'm really confused what happened in those last 5.5 books. I'm not going to talk about it anymore because I really hope people get into it. If you have read those books, reach out to us at www.tdontopo.com. Give us your hot takes, because there's nothing that I want more than to talk about how confused I am by Dune 2.5 through Dune 7.
You think Teton Topo can be making any worm maps, or is that observable from the surface?
War maps?
Worm
maps on the desert planet of Dune. If anybody's looking for a GIS contractor, please reach out. Especially if you know where the melange is. We would be happy to participate.
Teton Topo's going to space.
Teton Topo's going to space. Yep, this is the grand reveal. Well, that's pretty much the end of our show, folks. I just want to say thank you to KCIW. Thank you to the Northwest American Indian Coalition. Thank you to Rick McNamer, our sponsor. My name is Dakotah Daily. I am the host of the Daily Weekly, and you have been listening in to the studio. I'm here with Bryce Andreasen. Bryce, thank you for listening.